You're listening to Black and Green Toledo, a show about the planet, Mother Earth, and the industrial wasteland known as Toledo and Northwest Ohio. And this is your host, Keith Sadler, covering topics of pollution, the poisoning of our water, air, and soil. From the headwaters of the Maumee and the dirty shores of Lake Erie, the occupied and stolen lands of the Shawnee and Ottawa nations, join us as we explore green anarchism and the failures of civilization. What's to be done and what is being done. It's not all doom and gloom, mostly, but not all. Communities on the planet are fighting back. We'll share their stories and whether it can happen in the Glass City. Okay, so this show, we're going to be focusing on the environment, but not exclusively. The crimes against the earth and its inhabitants, including people, are very connected. All come from the same place, whether it's people of color, LGBT community, as well as those who are impoverished through their work or lack thereof. And we'll focus our perspective from a green anarchist framework. But also, again, not exclusively. I want to give voice to anyone struggling in local causes regarding social justice issues. I might even let some of the ISO folks into our studios, and just so you know, that's the International Socialist Organization. A little more on that in a few, but I'm essentially talking in jest, sort of. I have a vision of what this broadcast would function as, but ultimately my intent is to stoke the flames of action. Toledo has significant environmental issues, including the poisoning of our water supply, and nothing substantial is being done about it. We will devote a lot of time on that issue, but we barely raised a stink to the BP Husky tar sands oil retooling to start refining oil sands or tar sands oil. A natural gas electric generation power plant's been built over in Oregon, and nothing's being done about it. We got a pipeline coming through, a major natural gas pipeline coming through, and the fight is just beginning there. So then we have thousands of radioactive contaminated materials that have been dumped at the landfill off Hagman Road. And I personally emailed all of City Council. I emailed the Blade. I got a response back from the Blade, but after I told them what my sources were, they failed to do any kind of printing of my letter to the Blade. And so therefore we still have this all this radioactive, thousands of tons of radioactive drill cuttings from West Virginia were brought into the Hagman Road landfill. Also, we have First Energy trying to renew the license at Davis-Besse. They're such an inept and greedy company that they put the public in danger, tried to hide it, and of course the NRC has done nothing to stop that kind of actions by Davis-Besse. And as far as the Bayshore power plant, although most of those coal burning furnaces there are being shut down, they had been ordered to lower their mercury emissions, and then the Ohio EPA just agreed to go ahead and let them continue those depositing that poisonous stuff in our air. We'll talk about the fallacy of regulatory agencies and how they're actually there more to control how the public puts in effort in what we can do than they are actually controlling the agencies that they're supposedly regulating. But we need to stop the poisoning of our air, water, and soil now. Our planet is dying. So, again, I took the long way around to point out what is not only my motivating factor to put on this show, but my main goal is to spur action. I want people to know what's going on. I want people to act because of what's going on. I'll also leave you with resources to information, the links, books, journals. Oh, we want to bring you music too. So if there's anybody out there, a local band who plays socially motivated or social justice issue songs, lyrics, and we'd like to put a focus on your music and play it on the show. So eventually we'll have some kind of way for you to contact the show directly. Right now, I guess we'd say at the Toledo Integrated Media Education Facebook page would be the best way to contact me. You can look for the post when this show goes. I guess live. It won't be live, but when it goes on the Facebook page, and you can contact me there because I want this to be a participatory type show. We want people calling in. We want people discussion. You can say I'm an idiot. You can have discussion, give your opinions, and then we want you to be calling in and joining us in this discussion. And again, as far as the music goes, I'm sure you'll enjoy a break from my voice from time to time. Also, this might be a good time to put the disclaimer out there is that I've never done any type of radio show. It's probably already obvious, or journalistic piece. So please bear with me. You'll probably hear a few ums and ahs as I try to get my thoughts together, and we'll kind of go from that. We'll have some co-hosts from time to time, some guests, and if you want a topic explored, get a hold of us and we'll look into it. So on today's show, we're going to talk a little bit about what anarchism is, what green anarchism is, and the different zones of thought, lines of thought in that philosophy. And we'll try not to burden you with the philosophy, but we may from time to time do a show specifically on that subject. And and I definitely like to hear your input. But there's a lot of misinformation out there about anarchy, anarchism, and that kind of thing. Also on today's show, I'm gonna give you a little bit of bio on myself. I mean, obviously, I've been around a few years, and I don't want to give you the whole play-by-play, but I think it's kind of important to know where I came from in respect to politics and location and all that kind of stuff, and I think it may play a part in understanding maybe where I'm from. And some of this I may not even know, and I'm sure people will be wanting to point that out. So I guess we'll start with that. I'll kind of tell you a little bit about myself first. I'm actually not from around Northwest Ohio area, although I've lived here quite a few years now. But I was born in Queens, New York, one of the 5 boroughs in New York City. Lost most of my New York accent, I think because of my dad's being from Nashville, Tennessee, or outside Nashville, Tennessee. My mom was born in Brooklyn, and her parents were born in Brooklyn. So, but I still say soda, and I still say fog, and some other words that might still have a twang of the New York bred accent that I lived around. My parents became very religious. They were Baptists, fundamental Baptist, and I kind of walked in those lines for quite a while. They were also involved in conservative party politics back in them days, and actually voted for Wallace and LeMay and supported his campaign. My dad even ran for library board because he was interested in trying to ban books that they felt were not Christian ethics, or that people should not be allowed to judge and see whether the book was should be read. And so I was brought up under that. My parents had put me in with the John Birch Society, which was a really, really radical right-wing organization. So this is kind of where I grew up in. They had me go to a Christian school out on Long Island, and then back in, this will date me here, but back in 72, I think it was, 72, we moved out in the Delta Lions area out there. I went to Delta High School, finished up my last 2 years of high school out there. Then I went and joined the Navy, and all this time I had been kind of, I don't know, I always questioned authority, and it always got me in trouble at home. My dad was pretty strict, and so he, probably started my anti-authoritarian leaning then. And so going in the Navy might also not seem like a very smart choice, knowing that at that time I didn't know. And I joined to see the world and to get an occupation. It was just at the tail end of the Vietnam War. They were actually still withdrawing troops from Vietnam at that time when I joined. I went into the nuclear power program. I ended up getting kicked out of the nuclear power program. I got accused, and I guess a little bit of a funny note here, I got accused of failure to follow laws, military rules, and all that kind of stuff, because I was dressed up like a mummy during study time. Some friends of mine decided they thought it'd be funny to wrap some toilet paper around my head, and I got up dragging my foot along, acting like a mummy, and was caught by the senior lifer, senior chief that didn't think it was very funny when I growled at him, trying to impersonate a mummy. And I was therefore put on captain's mast, and Article 32, I think it was called, and was asked a question. And at this time I was having some philosophical thinking or leanings at that time, and he asked me a question of whether or not I thought that I could decide what laws and rules to obey. And of course, the thing in my mind, I couldn't make it simple. I had to think, well, let's see, if they asked me to gas people or gas Jews in a concentration camp, I would definitely be saying no. So my answer to him was, it depends, and I might have to decide whether those rules are moral or not. And he slammed his book shut, and he says, I find you guilty of the charges brought before you. And later on, when I appealed it, he also commented that my disregard for rules and regulations was the worst he'd ever seen in his term at being commanding officer of nuclear power school. But they still made me stay in for 6 years, or tried to make me stay in for 6 years. And long story short there, when I was in San Diego, we ended up having real bad working conditions on the ship. Worked in the engine room, hottest place and dirtiest place on the ship, where they sent people for punishment on the ship to go do our regular job. and we ended up having a walk-off on the ship, essentially a strike, and I ended up getting accused of instigating the walk-off, which I did not instigate, but I was definitely involved. And so ended up getting an attorney because they were writing me up basically for mutiny. And I got an attorney from a group called the Enlisted People's Rights Organization, and they came on board. This guy had a thin collared shirt on so that you could see he was wearing a T-shirt with the caricature of Mao Zedong on his chest, and he was wearing jeans and sandals, and he was my attorney. But they come up and asked me. They said, "All right, you want out of the Navy?" And I said yes. And so they essentially were lenient. I did get fined again, and was then put up for discharge, and I got a general discharge. And so, that was again the starting of my noticing that I had problems with authority figures and that kind of thing, but still no real political insight. I ended up, when I got out of the Navy, ended up working in a factory. It was a UAW shop, and ended up president of the local there. Got into it all the time with the bosses there, and still no real idea what that struggle was, why I was fighting, why, the philosophy behind worker exploitation and fighting worker exploitation. I had a little bit of a battle with drugs and alcohol, and eventually when I sobered up, I started opening my mind up to things. I started taking classes out to University of Toledo, and was introduced then to Karl Marx and Max Weber and W.E.B. Du Bois, and started seeing a whole different world, and started seeing a world that had been criticized in my upbringings with the conservative background, and started to look into things. And I eventually joined, at that time, I had joined the ISO, the International Socialist Organization. I don't know if that circus thing might have been a Freudian slip there, I don't know. But eventually led to getting expelled from the ISO due to philosophic differences. I used to get into arguments with the guy who was more or less I guess you'd say he's the leader of the Toledo group at that time, and when he would quote me his answers to certain questions, it sounded like it was coming exactly from the Socialist Worker paper under What We Believe. And I said, well, what do you believe? That's what the paper says. What do you believe? And most of the time he couldn't, or he'd just say, well, that is what I believe. And he felt that it was more important to be on agreement with everybody in this organization than to have differing opinions and express them. And that was where we really differed, and I ended up getting expelled from there. And we had done a bunch of actions with the ISO, anti-war. We had done. We were at the riots back in 2005 here in Toledo, and all along the way there was a group of people that were at a lot of the same actions, and they were some local anarchists. And so when I got kicked out of the ISO, I was frustrated. I thought I found, a philosophy that I could believe in and live with, and now I was really starting to question that. And so I started looking into this group here in Toledo. At that time, they were called the October 15th anarchist collective, and I started reading what is anarchism, what do they believe, and it took a little while before I was convinced that a stateless society would be right, and that there was connections between like anarchism and communism, and eventually took on the label of anarcho-communist myself. Um, and this led on to other things. I was involved with some actions with the anarchist group. We um, I guess my quote unquote claim to fame would be the Stony Ridge occupation that we did in 2010. And my house was being foreclosed on, and we had formed a group that was called the Toledo Foreclosure Defense League, and we wanted to fight and help people resist being evicted out of their homes. And after talking with people, we could never find anybody that wanted to take that extra step and resist an eviction. We had people cry to me on the phone. I had people that were pissed off, about what was going on the phone, losing their home that they put money into, the same as I had, and having medical problems or whatever. The banks didn't care. And this wasn't about the fraud and everything else that went in. It was just the idea of the profit or housing for profit, housing speculations, and that type of thing. So we resisted the eviction. We spent 5 days in the house. We had it. We really did a very organized job. And yes, anarchists can be organized. We had cement block doorways. We put plywood with braces over all the doors and windows in the house. The basement, it was a 2-story house with the basement, so there was a lot of places to have to do that. We streamed live from inside the house. We had press conferences out on the porch, and we took calls from MSNBC. We were actually, the morning we got raided, the 5th day, we were actually supposed to go on Democracy Now! Live, and obviously that didn't happen because like 4 o'clock in the morning, 5 o'clock in the morning, something like that, we heard glass busting all around the house. And then so we locked down inside the house, and there was 7 of us inside, and a group of people who were outside to support. Apparently they were sleeping when the sheriff's department came, so our only noticing of this happening was the glass shattering outside. And we locked down in some lock boxes, one of them that even went right through the wall. It took them, I don't know how long actually it was after they broke in, where they came charging in with their 9mm and all their armor and everything else on them, and pointing their guns at us, and we were just sitting there, in a circle, locked down, and I think they were a little bit surprised. But so here I am today. I've done tried doing some other organizing around, like I said, the BP tar sands, the expansion out there, and it just didn't go anywhere. We had the first protest we did where we actually did shut down a BP station on Secor and Central. We wrapped, it wasn't police tape, but it was caution tape, and blocked all the entrances so that there was a period of probably at least 10-15 minutes where nobody was pulling into the gas station, and until the cops broke through the tape when they came. But after that, we maybe had 5-6 people at a protest, and we just couldn't raise any kind of enthusiasm for acting on this issue. So, I've been frustrated with trying to organize around polluters and that type of thing, and so I basically just kind of sat out for a while. And then when Sean and some other folks looked into Sean Nestor, that is, looked into starting a radio station, I thought maybe something that I can do here. And so now, of course, it's sort of real, and whether or not it'll stick or not, I don't know. And I know this radio station's going to have sort of a short, I want to say, radius as far as coverage goes. So it's going to be important that if you like what you hear on the show, or if you don't like what you hear on the show and you want to tell other people about it and get them to call in and argue with me or bash me or whatever, it's important that you get the word out to other people around Toledo and let them know, because there'll be an archive so that you can hear the show after it's been broadcast. It's my understanding anyway. You'll be able to hear the show after it's been broadcast if you weren't able to actually hear it live. And we're going to try to have chat rooms or ways to continue discussion long after the show is aired. So we want you to get involved. So, okay, let's talk a little bit about what actually anarchism is. What is anarchism? And I'll try to do this real short. I don't want to, like I said, I don't want to bog down on theory and definitions and that kind of thing, but I think it's important to at least set a little bit of a base where we're coming from. And so I'm going to do a little bit of reading, and most of this stuff here at the beginning is from a source I want to tell you about, infoshop.org, and they have what they call an anarchist FAQ, and they try to answer all sorts of questions on what anarchism is, what types of anarchism are, and what the differences are between them. And there's really a lot more than even what I thought, initially, the different schools of thought. Okay, so from infoshop.org, anarchism is a political theory which aims to create a society within which individuals freely cooperate together as equals. As such, anarchism opposes all forms of hierarchical control, be that control by the state or a capitalist, as harmful to the individual and the individuality as well as unnecessary. In the words of anarchist L. Susan Brown, while the popular understanding of anarchism is of a violent anti-state movement, anarchism is a much more subtle and nuanced tradition than a simple opposition to government power. Anarchists oppose the idea that power and domination are necessary for society, and instead advocate more cooperative, anti-hierarchical forms of social, political, and economic organization. And the word anarchy is derived from the Greek prefix an, or a, meaning not, the want of, the absence of, or the lack of, plus archos, meaning a ruler or director or chief, person in charge, authority. Or as Peter Kropotkin put it, anarchy comes from the Greek words meaning contrary to authority. Also, anarchism can be understood as a generic social and political idea that expresses negation of all power, sovereignty, domination, and hierarchical division, and a will to their dissolution. Anarchism is therefore more than anti-statism, even if government, the state, is appropriately the central focus of anarchist critique. And that quote was from Benjamin Tucker in his book Reinventing Anarchy. All right, so then under anarchism, there are like I said, different types of anarchism. And the one that we're going to be focusing on is what is titled green anarchism. That's the black and green title of our program. Elise Reclus, a French geographer, argued that a secret harmony exists between the earth and the people whom it nourishes. And when imprudent societies let themselves violate this harmony, they always end up regretting it, like we are today. And let's see, I won't read the rest of that. So there are different kinds of, even under green anarchism, there are different kinds of green anarchists. And this is something I'm still trying to iron out, even my own philosophy as to what I am. Most green anarchists are anti-civ, as they call it, anti-civilization anarchists, but not all want to go all the way back to gatherer-hunter society, but quite a few believe it's really the only true course. And I'm not in that boat, but I definitely agree with the critique of modern day civilization. A lot of the theorists nowadays, they blame domestication of plants and animals, agriculture, symbols which led to language, and say those are all the detriments that led to civilization. And I have not done enough research and thought on the subject enough to completely disagree, but I'm not completely there. A lot of the writings that some of the anarchist theorists have, particularly like John Zerzan and Kevin Tucker, a lot of their writings, when they talk about primitive society, they may name authors who they're talking about, get their information from, but they don't cite the works in most cases, and that bugs the heck out of me. I'm a person who likes to. I bought more books because of one book that I've read, and something that was sourced or cited in that book, I wanted to go read and read further on it. And with these guys' books, you can't really follow that up that much. I'm not going to buy every book by an author to find the one quote or one piece of information that they've had. But one of the more modern green anarchists, and I find a lot of fault with his stuff too, but it was Murray Bookchin, and he was considered, like, I guess, well, even though he didn't actually coin the term deep ecology, but he was one of the early writers, thinkers in this area on deep ecology, social ecology. And then there's another group, and I'll read this, and this is also from InfoShop. It says, however, a very small but vocal minority of self-proclaimed green anarchists disagree. Writers such as John Zerzan, John Moore, and David Watson have expounded a vision of anarchism which, they claim, aims to critique every form of power and oppression. This is often called anarcho-primitivism, which, according to Moore, is simply a shorthand term for a radical current that critiques the totality of civilization from an anarchist perspective and seeks to initiate a comprehensive transformation of human life. Okay, so again, this is from infoshop.org. There's another really, really good online resource that's called, having a brain fart here. It's called the Anarchist Library, and if you go to anarchistlibrary.org, I believe is the website address. They have tons of actual print material, journal articles, books from a lot of anarchist thinkers. Well, it was for me. It was a little confusing on how to navigate the site when I went up and found the search, and I did search for like John Zerzan, and all that came up was, I guess, subjects of John Zerzan, and there's a few critiques of his work in there. But I went on the homepage, I went all the way to the bottom, and it has like little bracketed links to, say, authors, titles, and that kind of thing. So you can look for that. I'm not sure how a subject search would do on there, but you can try that as well. But you can just poke around and look at, because all the articles in books are, I believe, from anarchists or I mean, there's books on Marx and things like that in there too. But it's really, really good source. And I'll give you one other good source too. There's the Little Black Cart, which is an anarchist publishing arm, and we actually are hoping to have. Well, I don't know if he considers himself the head of Little Black Cart, but it was kind of his project, publishing arm for green anarchists, and he considers himself, I guess, a green anarchist nihilist, which we'll get into that at one point in time. We actually hope to have him. He's going to be in the Toledo area over the Old West End Festival, and we hope to have him, if not live, we'll have him do an interview with him and somehow or another either edit out or put most of that interview on our next show. We're not sure the scheduling, how things are going to work out for other shows. Okay, I wanted to get into just a little bit some of the issues specific to Toledo, and two issues that we're going to go into a lot deeper on further shows, and I want to touch on today is the Ottawa River pollution, as well as the algal bloom problem, and both of them stemming from essentially the same watershed. Ottawa River obviously is a separate tributary, but leads into Maumee Bay, and of course you have the Maumee River problem. Some of them have similar problems with the nutrients, the nitrogen or nitrates and phosphorus that is getting into the water supply, and we'll go into that. But here recently, the Ohio EPA and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, two watchdogs who, like I kind of hinted to earlier, they do more maybe watching the public or limiting the public's input into what can be said and what can be done in changing their plans. But they had a meeting. It was a draft restoration plan for the Ottawa River, and it was at City Council chambers, and I attended that meeting. And my history with the Ottawa River is really kind of sad. As I said, I'm not from this area, but when I finally started hanging around Toledo, my only knowledge of the pollution problem at the Ottawa River was seeing the signs up saying, do not eat fish from this river, do not swim, do not bathe in the river, which is pretty scary, actually. And I never looked into it any further. I just knew that the Ottawa River was a polluted river and not very healthy. And so when I found the notice that this restoration plan they were having a meeting on, I started doing a little bit of research, and the amount of pollutants that went in and where they came from is just astounding. But even more astounding is the fact that, as it was stated at the meeting, that the Ohio EPA decided to take a collaborative, make just a collaborative effort rather than an adversarial effort. Know that the Ohio EPA wants to be buddies with those who are poisoning our water supply, and it lists. And I don't have the actual list in front of me, but I can name some from off the top of my head of the polluters. And Jeep was one of the big ones, the old Jeep plant. They also listed DuPont Chemical, still in Toledo, still a very profitable company. And then we have Honeywell. There was AP Parts, which left town or went out of business. I want to check into that a little bit more. But a lot of these plants that were near the Ottawa River, and actually it looks like maybe we're even dumping on site, dumping PCBs, I think HABs, lead, I mean all sorts of toxic stuff. A lot of the stuff came into the Ottawa River via the Dura Avenue landfill, which was a city-owned landfill. And it is what they report to be having been remediated, which I'm not exactly sure of the definition of remediated, but I don't see how you can totally block the chemicals and stuff that was poured into the landfill from reaching aquifers, and obviously maybe they've stopped from runoff, but it's not good. But anyway, there was an article in this, I think it's this past Sunday's paper, and it was in reference to the meeting and the problems with the Ottawa River. And the very top of the article has a picture of a person and their granddaughter playing along the Ottawa River at the Howard Pinkley Landing. It says this river is off limits for swimming and fishing, but officials hope to clean it up enough to change that by 2030. Now, my research shows that the EPA became aware at least as early as 1986, 1988, with some water testing and fishing or fish samples that were taken of like PCB contamination being like 400 or 500 times the acceptable limits that were back then. And so now here they're projecting, and they're saying that this pollution came from back in the era after World War II on, either from improper dumping. Let me see if I can find it here. I don't know if I underlined it in the article. All right, well, I can't find it offhand, but it just shows how bad it is. And there's supposed to be a report coming out. The U.S. EPA is going to be releasing, and I don't know why it takes so long, but they did a new water sampling sometime in the end of 2015, something like that, and so someday they're going to release that information. And from what it looks like here, being that it won't be cleaned up enough till 2030, I imagine that report is not going to be very good. But at the meeting, because I specifically asked the question about what the condition of the Ottawa River is now, and they said better. And they said that new reports coming out may be able to cause the advisories, the fishing and bathing and swimming and touching the water, I guess, may come off in soon. At least that was the impression they gave me. Stuff in the article, I mean, I don't know if I was at a different meeting or what, but either that or it was in a press release that the Blade got. But I don't remember seeing this stuff in here. But in 2010, I guess, maybe somewhere around the time we were doing our occupation in Stony Ridge, they were dredging up materials in the Ottawa River, thousands of tons of stuff that they dredged up. They piped the dredged material to another landfill, which is also on the Ottawa River, the Hoffman Road landfill. Hoffman Road landfill is not a hazardous waste landfill. So I don't know how this material containing all these hazardous wastes can go to I don't know if you call any landfill a regular landfill, but obviously one that's maybe not designed with the protections that a hazardous waste landfill would be. But they're all man-made structures, and I think they all can leak and probably will leak at some point in time. You know, we have the big hazardous injection wells out near Clyde that, you know, they found leaked millions of gallons of toxic substances into the water supply around there. And of course, they still say that there's no link between that injection leak and all the cancer clusters that are occurring in the Clyde area. I have a little hard time with that. But those are some of the things that we're going to be looking at. And 47. Okay. So those are some of the things that we're going to be looking at. I also want to go into a little bit more, because it's funny, because the Jeep site, of course, Jeep has abandoned that site, going to, you know, another location, and actually part of the parking area where they stage vehicles to be shipped out, and also other vehicles that come in waiting to get on a train to get shipped. That parking lot on the west side of Stickney was the Stickney Avenue landfill, and was right across the river from the Dura Avenue landfill. And apparently that one had leaked as well. And now Jeep is sitting on top of that. Part of Jeep is sitting on top of that landfill. So we're going to be looking in, because one thing I don't understand is the coziness between these polluters and governmental regulatory agencies. So I'm going to be doing some FOIA requests from the Ohio EPA, and we're going to look into that relationship a little bit more. So a lot of these polluters formed a group that was called the Ottawa River Group, and one of the fixes that they're planning on doing is, which is, well, it's not totally unrelated to the Ottawa River, but it's not cleaning up the Ottawa River anymore. It's projects that are like at the Manhattan Marsh, buying property there and turning it over to the metro parks, and so it's money being taken supposedly from these polluters. I don't know how much, because nowadays we, the public, have to share in the cleanup costs that these very profitable businesses caused. And the brownfield and Superfund thing is really something that I find disturbing and have problems with. And not that it's a way to get the areas cleaned up, but it's a way of letting those who are responsible off the hook. And that's just not acceptable. And part of the whole fallacy of government regulation. So we'll look into that. We'll look into the whether the city of Toledo is more culpable than what it is being held to in its role with these piss poor landfill maintenance, allowing our waters to be polluted. And I guess just to maybe give a little bit on there we go. I knew I was going to do the thing probably about 20 times. We ought to have someone doing an count while I'm doing this presentation. Actually, no, I don't want to hear it. But I know there's going to be a few of them. And there's another article from the Blade, and this one's from like in 2014, and it's called Green and Beyond. A thoughtful new plan links environmental protection in Greater Toledo to economic growth and social equity. And I'm just going to read one sentence here, and we'll look into this a little bit more. Lucas County has a green sustainability plan or something like that, and we'll look into that. But this start of this one paragraph, it says the sustainability plan, summarized as people, planet, and profit, is an outgrowth of years of discussions among local public officials, employers, community and environmental groups, and other major social and educational institutions. And I mean, that's things that we have a problem with, and that critique of civilization includes is that these things can't coexist. You can't be sustainable and be true to the environment, because the economy is based on this thing called growth. You have to continuously grow, and whether that means you suck up other companies, whether you outsource jobs overseas or outsource food overseas so that you're not polluting here, even though you're polluting somewhere else, is just inevitable with a civilized world. And so we'll be looking more into that, because like I said, one of the critiques of civilization is that you can't. And I agree that modern civilization is definitely not sustainable. But whether or not we have to go back to gatherer hunters, that's kind of where I, at least right now anyway, where I have some problems with the anarcho-primitivist line of thought. And all right, so when we're talking about the anti-civ thought, I want to read a quote. And let's see. I think this is from a book that's called Against Civilization. It's edited by John Zerzan, but the quote comes from Chellis Glendenning, and it basically says that it experiences is not just contemporary industrial society that is dysfunctional. It is civilization itself. That we humans are born to be creatures of the land and the sea and the stars. That we are reactions to the animals, cohorts to the plants. And then, and like I said, it's from Against Civilization. And then you can go also to on the Anarchist Library, what I would recommend you checking out is a piece by John Zerzan, or actually I don't know if it's by him, but it's under his writings, and it's called A Dialogue on Primitivism, and it actually has people who talk about before and after. And I was planning on reading a little bit from that, because it has some really good descriptions of what green anarchism is that isn't anti-civ or isn't primitivist, and then what anarcho-primitivism means. So that's a good spot there. to find that kind of information. Also, I wanted to let you know that there's going to be it's a group called Earth First, if you haven't heard of it. They are like one of the earlier radical environmental groups that came around, very anarchist in its beginnings and a lot of its focus now. But they're going to be having, so if you go to Earth First Journal or Earth First Journal slash earthfirstjournal.org/newswire, I believe it is, and you can see, and I was actually going to read some of the what's in the news, because that's one of the things I want to do on here is talk about what's going on around the country, around the world, because there is a lot of resistance going on to polluters, stopping mines. Actually, the activists in Denmark actually kicked a company completely out of Denmark that does fracking, and they basically have left the country and are not pursuing their projects there. So there are some good things going on, good resistance going on. Some of the type of things that I'd like to see happen here in Toledo. But we need to, we need to educate. We need to agitate against these polluters. Hold them accountable. Hold them accountable to us, because they're not going to be held accountable to the EPA or any other agency. And so this group, Earth First, is going to be having a what they call Earth First Rendezvous, and it's going to be like a week-long activities, workshops, and that type of thing, and it's going to be somewhere up in Michigan. They haven't released the exact location yet, but June 29th to July 6th, I believe it is. Camping, workshops on resistance, and the different struggles that are going on. It's going to be partially put on by MICATS, or MICATS, and it's the Michigan Coalition Against Tar Sands and Detroit Coalition Against Tar Sands, and then a group called, I don't have it here, Fen Valley Earth First or something like that. And then we're going to try, June 11th is the International Day of Solidarity with eco-prisoners, people who have put their freedom on the line to try to protect the earth. Some of them guilty of, or accused and found guilty of arson, freeing animals from labs and fur farms and that type of thing. And so we'll probably post something if we want to do some kind of remembrance here in Toledo, which we've done before. Probably be at the Collingwood Garden, which, by the way, the Collingwood Garden is a continuing, initially anarchist or anarchist-inspired project, expropriating public land for the use of the people. And we also have been involved with the Toledo Free School, which is also another anarchist project. And I don't know really what's going on with that right now. Maybe we'll get Lance in here to talk about that on our next show. Maybe get Lance and Nick in here to talk about the Collingwood Garden and Toledo Free School. But so that's what's going on. That's what we're trying to do here. We're going to try to get people riled up, and because we aren't going to be able to depend on government. We aren't going to be able to depend on science and technology to solve all our problems. And so hopefully I haven't scared you off from listening to further broadcasts. Like I said, you'll have to give me a little bit of leeway for not being a pro at this. Hopefully I'll get better, and I will take criticisms, constructive or otherwise. But help me, help me to make this a show, because we need Toledo needs some movement in environmental concerns. Actually, one website I checked says that there are what are termed Superfund sites in Toledo, that there's like 47 Superfund sites that have been polluted, and they may not be national priority or priorities listed, but they are nonetheless grounds that are poisoned and not being cleaned up. And if the EPA, Ohio EPA, knew about how polluted this river was back in 1986, and here it is 2016, and they're saying it may still not be cleaned up till 2030, in my mind, that's not progress. And we need to speak up, and we need to do what we need to do to force these things to be cleaned up and to stop civilization. So from ruining any more of our planet. So I hope you come back. And I'm not sure when the next show is going to be, but keep checking the Facebook page for when we go live, and we may even be doing another recorded segment, another pilot number 2, I guess you could call it, for the show. But I want your feedback. I want your participation, and let's see if we can make the glass city shatter. Thank you.